Good evening, everybody. Well, what a sickener that was for Cheltenham Town. They've just been beaten 2-1 by Leyton Orient, playing the whole of the second half, fair bit of the first half as well, with 10 men through Ben Williams' sending off. They took the lead in the second half as well through a Will Goodwin penalty. And Leyton Orient didn't turn up, arguably in the first half and certainly for 40 minutes. Or close to that in the second half. But they sort of turned the screw right at the end as the substitutions for Richie Wellens' side made the difference, and they grabbed two late goals, which a big relief for the O's. It ends a long 8-game winless streak for Richie Wellens' side. I'm sure they'll be glad to have that monkey off their backs, but a lot of work, I think, needed in terms of the performance, and I think that was probably part of the reason why we didn't really see much of a fist pump in terms of massive celebrations at the end of the game, because I think the jubilation and the enjoyment at the result was kind of a little bit mixed from the Orient perspective, with a certain amount of, whether embarrassment would be the right word, but certainly disappointment with the performance. Do you know, I'm going to go straight in with it from the Leyton Orient point of view, because I think well, there's two components to this as to why the O's didn't play as I might have hoped. First of all, and I felt this about Leyton Orient for quite a while, actually going back to the second half of last season, I actually felt quite strongly that while Darren Pratley is an excellent professional, I don't think that he was going to be able to control games at League One level. I think that's been proven when he has been fit, although I believe he started the season injured. Jordan Bryan actually did a solid job in the middle of the park. I'm 100% honest, call it as I say it on this podcast. I don't necessarily share what seems to be the majority Orient view on Jordan Bryan. I appreciate that might be quite controversial, but I got through the Lawrence Vigouroux scandal, so I'm going to kind of push on with it. He played right back today, obviously with Pratley in midfield. I don't think either of them quite do what Leyton Orient need from their number six in order to play the way Wellens wants at this level. I think when I look at Richie Wellens' sides, he's won 2 titles at this level, one with in League Two, not League One. I'm sure, hopefully, League One titles are going to come for him. In League Two, he's won a title with Swindon where Anthony Grant is the experienced destroyer, and he had a couple of more creative players ahead of him. Similar story, I think, in League with Leyton Orient, because Darren Pratley was at the basis of midfield, your grizzled veteran, and then you had George Moncur and Idris El Mazouni further forward. And I suppose the argument would be that you want your experienced destroyer, or someone who does a lot of the dirty work at the base of midfield, because Idris El Mazouni can collect the ball and bring his ball carrying ability and sort of do elements of what you'd want a progressive number six to do. I just don't really see it myself. I'd want Idris El Mazouni to be a little bit more freed up than that. To be honest, I don't know. I think that the absence of a quality six, from what I've seen of Leyton Orient this season, has actually been a bit of a problem for players like El Mazouni, because I don't think that the progression of the ball into more advanced areas has been of the quality that is required for a side that, broadly speaking, likes to be towards the more progressive end of the spectrum. I don't see Wellens quite as idealistic as, say, a Russ Martin or a Luke Williams, because I do think that he likes his side to be able to mix their passing up, and actually towards the end of the game in the second half, we saw a few longer passes, not long balls, but longer passes. And I do think that Wellens kind of believes he wants his sides to have the ball, but also with the mindset that there's different ways to skin a cat, and be able to respond to the challenges of different games. So he's kind of like 2/3 of the way alongside the progressive spectrum. That's how I see it anyway. In order to do that, I think you need someone who can collect and demand the ball off the defence and have a real personality and a bravery, because I think in League Two there's an element of opposing teams being so afraid of the quality of players Leyton Orient have and the way they play in the opposing half that they're actually willing to sacrifice a bit in terms of the press in order to sort of try and nullify some of those players. I think in League One, that's not the case as much. And therefore, you actually, in order to play the way that Rich Wellens wants, I feel like you need a number six that can actually beat the press a bit more consistently. I think Jordan Brown does that okay. I think he keeps the ball ticking over okay. I think he's got an excellent work ethic. I'm not saying he's a a Neanderthal or anything like that, but I do think that he has more limit. I perceive more limitations in Jordan Brown than I suspect the majority of the Orient fan base. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but that's kind of how I feel about it. He was right back today, and Pratley played at the base of midfield. And again, I think Pratley's limited, and it just felt to me this afternoon like there was this massive void of a controlling, creative, progressive presence at the base of Orient's midfield, because I looked at it and I did see flashes from Theo Archibald went on a couple of bright runs in the first half. I thought George Moncur, when they could release him into those pockets of space in the first half, played one or two creative passes. I thought that there was another lad who Ruel Sotirio I thought showed flashes. The players who came off the bench as well made a real difference, and I would credit Wellens for those substitutions. At the same time, it felt like Orient were missing that glue, bringing it all together. I've suggested Ethan Brierley for Orient, who's currently at Brentford, quite a bit in the past, and I do feel like his personality in midfield would make a real difference to them. But someone of his ilk, I think they really need. And then in the second half, I realise I'm on a bit of an Orient tangent at the moment. I will come to Cheltenham Town, of course. Second half, I did actually think that it was more of a look. I'm a massive admirer of Wellens. I think he's a fantastic manager that Orient have got, and I do feel that over if they can keep hold of him over the next 3 or 4 years, I think he's capable of building a side that can challenge for the playoffs at this level, especially if they can get a bit of American investment. At the same time, I am going to call what I saw this afternoon, and I think that Wellens has to take his portion of accountability for what was on offer this afternoon, which wasn't good enough in an isolated, minuscule, big picture. I'm a massive fan of him, but just in terms of the minuscule picture of what I saw this afternoon, that wasn't good enough. And I felt like Orient were trying to play on the counter-attack when it was either goalless or they were a goal behind with a man advantage. Can I see that to a certain point? Yes, because Curtis Davies isn't the quickest. So I suppose I can see why you'd want to try and draw Cheltenham to press and then try and find those one-on-one situations, which they threatened to on occasions, but they were occasions because Orient were pinned back a lot and they didn't really leave players forward. And seeing as they don't have searing pace up top or a massive sort of physical presence, which maybe you'd have hoped Dan Ajayi can provide some of that, but actually he looked a little bit rusty to my eyes, recently coming back from injury. That was a difficult watch, really, because and again, which I'll come on to, I think you've got to give Cheltenham an awful lot of credit for how aggressive they were in the second half, I think, I'm just a little bit disappointed, and I don't whether it was by design to try and draw them in. Maybe there was a bit of that. I also felt at certain moments the character of one or two players I would question slightly. There was one occasion in the second half where there was a pass to Ruel Sotirio, which, okay, it wasn't super precise, and it sort of went out for a Cheltenham throw-in, but Ruel Sotirio was almost quicker to throw his arms up at the player who misplaced the pass than he was to actually try and run for the ball. And I'm not a huge fan of that moment, and I don't want to sort of be too judgmental based on that sort of individual moment, because I actually saw other moments where Ruel Sotirio was pressing and was running for it, but I just feel like I want to see a bit more of that version of Ruel Sotirio rather than the version that you don't quite know what you're going to get from him, because I do think that he's got a lot of talent, have a career in hopefully the top two leagues of English football. But I think he's got to apply himself consistently. I look at Will Goodwin, for example. Let's go on to Cheltenham, because Will Goodwin, he was in pre-season being at best fourth choice striker for Cheltenham Town. He'd recently made the move from Torquay United, having a decent time in the National League. That was a huge gamble. And this season there was talk that, is he going to be good enough for League One? Are Cheltenham Town going to loan him out? Similar question marks at times have been levelled at George Lloyd. They were the Cheltenham Town's two starting strikers. Is that, in terms of individual ability between Raul Soteriou and George Lloyd and Will Goodwin, slightly different types of players, admittedly, absolutely no comparison. In terms of natural ability, Will Goodwin and George Lloyd, I think, are pretty much National League standard, but they absolutely ran their asses. They ran all game, even in adversity. They kept going. And I really admired that, and that's what's sort of taken them up from being fourth choice striker at Cheltenham to possibly being loaned out and maybe being offloaded, to all of a sudden starting regularly for a resurgent team in League One. That's the difference, and that for me, I think, is the benchmark to my eyes for Raul Soteriou, albeit slightly different playing style. But I think that the work ethic of Lloyd and Goodwin also allowed Darrell Clarke to approach this game the way that he did. And Cheltenham Town are much more aggressive under Clarke. They press a lot higher. Adam Murray, I think, is quite a big factor behind that. He's relatively recently joined the coaching staff, because he's worked with Valérien Ismaël at Barnsley, at West Brom, and at Besiktas. And Ismaël is very much of an extreme high pressing coach, and I think Murray has taken on some of those ideas. And actually, I think that those two players really suit that aspect of what Murray and Clarke want from their strikers. And actually, I'm so impressed with how Cheltenham were able to pin Leyton Orient back. Again, their work rate was outstanding, and at times in the first half an hour before Liam Sercombe was taken off, presumably for tactical reasons, Sercombe was actually the one pressing up with those two. So yeah, Cheltenham, I think they want to be very aggressive. They want to try and almost continue to play the way that they want to, in terms of being on that front foot against the ball and being so aggressive, even when they had 10 men. And I think that's really, really admirable. Unfortunately, they weren't quite able to sustain it, and maybe they were a bit jaded in those last 5 minutes, and they ran out of oxygen a bit, which I can kind of understand. But also, from a Cheltenham point of view, you'd probably rather that a little bit than under the previous regime. I don't think Cheltenham would have put as much of a fight up as they did this afternoon and created the chances they did with 10 men, as well as taking the lead, because they would have sat back and tried to hold on for the point, and they might have lost 3-0. So yeah, I think there's an encouragement from that, and it's really hard, I think, from a Cheltenham Town point of view, to try and take encouragement from that battling performance, because it is so much about the points. There's a 6-point gap to safety because of Exeter City getting an unlikely point, also with 10 men, by the way, at Stevenage. And yeah, I think it's hard not to be sort of quite outcome oriented if you're a Cheltenham Town fan at the moment. But I think those were signs this afternoon that the players really are fighting for Darrell Clarke. And I think that if they can put that level of effort in between now and the end of the season, they've given themselves a bit of hope. And I think from where they were when Darrell Clarke first took charge, that's pretty much all they can ask for. Again, I'd like to sort of reiterate that the substitutions Wellens made really made a difference. Ethan Galbraith and Max Sanders, I thought, brought some fresh dynamism. Shaq Ford with that bit of skill and agility. Not the first time he's made an impact from the bench for the O's. I actually feel that while Orient don't have that quality six that I've mentioned, Moncur becomes a little bit redundant, because he's never going to be the most industrious player in the world. and so much of his performance depends on whether you are able to progress the ball into his vicinity of the pitch. And while that seems to be a difficulty for Orient at the moment, I would maybe go for the legs in midfield, go for the dynamism, and make sure that they're competitive from that point of view. Yeah, from Cheltenham's point of view, I actually, do you know what? Earlier in the game, I assumed they played with a back four because partly because from where I was sitting, it kind of looked a little bit like that. This was even at 11v11, but actually it was Curtis Davis on the right of the back three, which I'm not 100% sure that I agree with because I feel like you do have that risk of him being caught in those 1v1 duels. Daryl Clark, I'm sure, would argue that it's because he wanted a right footer on the right of his back three, which I can understand. But I think the preferable solution would have been to play Sean Long on the right of a back three, play Will Ferry at right wing back, play Ben Williams at left wing back, play Curtis Davis in the middle of a back three, and play Lewis Freestone there. Maybe there were 1-2 other solutions as well, but I think playing Curtis Davis on the right of back three, I think he did okay, and battled really well in the circumstances. But I think that different teams who maybe have different able to progress the ball differently might have been able to hurt Curtis Davis, although Theo Archibald did have a couple of runs against him and Long in the first half. And again, I think Cheltenham have a pretty battling midfield as well. Tom Pett again seems inevitable that he'll get a new improved contract with his form since Daryl Clark came in. Yeah, Cheltenham Town battled this afternoon, and while it's hard to take too much comfort from performances when they are in a position where results are so important. I think, yeah, they've got to try and take some encouragement from that and take it into a massive trip to Carlisle United next week.